widow and her daughter rescued from a wild bear. But the lonely cowboy found more than just gratitude. Welcome to a tale of courage, loss, and unexpected love in the heart of the American Old West. Today, we'll follow the story of a brave widow and her young daughter whose quiet life is shattered by danger, only to be saved by a mysterious cowboy who carries his own painful past. What begins as a desperate rescue becomes something much deeper, a story of healing, connection, and the courage to love again in an unforgiving land. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the modest homestead, nestled in a valley between rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Sarah Mitchell stood on her porch, watching her 8-year-old daughter Emma chase butterflies near the vegetable garden. The Wyoming territory stretched endlessly before them, beautiful yet isolating in its vastness. It had been 2 years since consumption took her husband Thomas, leaving Sarah to manage their small ranch alone. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and the town of Cedar Ridge was a full day's ride. But Sarah had grown strong in her solitude, learning to repair fences, tend livestock, and protect what remained of the life she and Thomas had built together. "Mama, look," Emma called out, her blonde braids bouncing as she pointed toward the chicken coop. "The hens laid 6 eggs today." Sarah smiled, her heart warming at her daughter's excitement over such simple pleasures. Emma had adapted to their isolated life with the resilience only children possess, finding joy in feeding the chickens, helping with the garden, and listening to her mother's evening stories by the fireplace. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We'll have a fine breakfast tomorrow," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on her apron. She had been tending to the tomato plants, trying to coax a better harvest from the stubborn soil. The peaceful moment shattered when a thunderous roar echoed from the nearby woods. Both mother and daughter froze. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the sound of grizzly bear, and by the volume of its call, a large one. "Emma, come here right now," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her chest. She had heard stories from other settlers about bear encounters, and none ended well for those caught unprepared. Emma dropped the basket of eggs and ran toward the house, her small face pale with confusion and growing terror. The roar came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of branches snapping as something massive moved through the underbrush. Sarah ushered Emma inside and quickly grabbed Thomas's old rifle from above the mantelpiece. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked the ammunition. Only 3 bullets remained. Thomas had always meant to buy more during their last trip to town, but that trip never came. "Mama, what's that noise?" Emma whispered, clinging to her mother's skirt. Before Sarah could answer, the bear emerged from the tree line. It was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, when it reared up on its hind legs, sniffing the air with obvious interest in their small livestock. The creature's brown fur was matted and scarred, suggesting it had survived many battles. This was an old, experienced predator, likely driven to desperation by a harsh winter that had left little natural food. The bear's attention focused on their small barn where they kept 2 milked cows and a handful of chickens. Sarah realized with growing dread that the animal could easily tear through the wooden structure and slaughter everything they depended on for survival. "We need to get to the root cellar," Sarah whispered to Emma, remembering the small underground storage space Thomas had built behind the house. It was their only hope of avoiding a direct confrontation. They crept through the back door, Sarah clutching the rifle, while Emma stayed pressed close to her side. The bear had begun investigating the barn, its massive paws testing the door latch. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before the creature broke through. Halfway to the cellar, Emma stumbled over a loose stone, crying out in pain and surprise. The sound carried across the yard, and the bear's head snapped toward them immediately. For a terrifying moment, predator and prey stared at each other across the open ground. The grizzly dropped to all fours and began moving in their direction, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. Sarah raised the rifle, knowing that missing would likely mean death for both her and Emma. Her hands shook as she tried to line up the sights, the bear growing larger with each thunderous step. If you're enjoying the video so far, a like and subscribe to the channel would really help me out. Just as Sarah prepared to fire, the sharp crack of a rifle shot split the air. The bear stumbled, roaring in pain and fury as a bullet found its mark in the creature's shoulder. Sarah spun around to see a lone rider approaching at full gallop, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of dust. The cowboy was tall and lean, dressed in worn leather chaps and a dark hat pulled low over his eyes. He guided his horse with expert skill while working the lever of his rifle, preparing for another shot. His weathered face showed no fear, only grim determination as he positioned himself between the wounded bear and the terrified family. The grizzly, wounded but far from defeated, turned its attention to this new threat. It charged toward the Corson rider with surprising speed, but the cowboy was ready. His second shot struck true, and the massive animal collapsed just yards from where Sarah and Emma stood frozen in terror. Silence settled over the homestead like a heavy blanket. The only sounds were the nervous snorting of the cowboy's horse and Emma's quiet sobs as she buried her face in her mother's dress. The stranger dismounted slowly, keeping his rifle ready as he approached the fallen bear. After confirming the animal was dead, he turned toward Sarah and Emma, removing his hat to reveal weathered features and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Are you folks hurt?" he asked, his voice deep and rough from years of riding dusty trails. There was genuine concern in his tone, though he maintained the cautious distance of a man unaccustomed to close human contact. "We're fine, thanks to you," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She lowered the rifle with trembling hands, only now realizing how close they had come to disaster. The cowboy nodded, studying the homestead with the practiced eye of someone who understood the challenges of frontier life. He noticed the well-maintained garden, the sturdy fences, and the general signs that this was a home built with care and determination. "Name's Jack Carson," he said simply. "I was passing through when I heard the commotion. Lucky thing, I was close enough to help. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is my daughter Emma," Sarah replied, her natural politeness overcoming her shock. We can't thank you enough. That bear would have killed us both." Jack's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Emma, who was peeking out from behind her mother's skirt with wide, curious eyes. Children were a rarity in his solitary world, and her innocence stirred something in his chest that he had thought long buried. "Just glad I could help, ma'am," he said. "This old bear's been causing trouble all over the territory. You're not the first folks he's threatened." The sun climbed higher as Jack helped Sarah drag the massive bear carcass away from the house. Despite his obvious strength and capability, Sarah noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. When she offered to help with the heavier work, he politely but firmly declined, clearly uncomfortable accepting assistance. "Mama, can I ask him about his horse?" Emma whispered, her initial fear giving way to childhood curiosity about the magnificent animal that had carried their rescuer. "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, though she kept her voice low. She sensed that Jack Carson was not a man who welcomed casual conversation, yet something about his gentle handling of the situation made her feel safe in his presence. Emma approached Jack's horse, a sturdy chestnut mare, with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. "What's her name?" Mr. Che asked, her small hand reaching tentatively toward the animal's nose. Jack paused in his work, seeming surprised by the direct question. "That's Rosie," he said after a moment. "She's been my partner for about 6 years now. Found her as a wild filly with a broken leg. Most folks would have put her down, but..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening slightly. "But you saved her," Emma finished, her eyes bright with understanding. "Just like you saved us." Something flickered across Jack's weathered features, pain, perhaps, or a surprise at the child's simple wisdom. "I suppose I did," he said quietly, reaching out to stroke Rosie's neck with surprising gentleness. Sarah watched this exchange with growing interest. Beneath this man's gruff exterior, she sensed depths of compassion that intrigued her. It had been so long since she had spoken with anyone other than Emma, and longer still since she had met someone who seemed to understand the weight of survival in this harsh land. "Mr. Carson," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Please, let me offer you some lunch. It's the least I can do after what you've done for us." Jack hesitated, clearly torn between his obvious hunger and his instinct to maintain distance. "That's kind of you, ma'am, but I don't want to impose. I should probably be moving on." "Please," Emma added, her young voice carrying a sincerity that seemed to catch Jack off guard. "Mama makes the best cornbread in all of Wyoming, and we have fresh milk from our cows." Sarah smiled at her daughter's innocent salesmanship, but she could see that the offer genuinely tempted Jack. His clothes were worn and dusty, suggesting he had been traveling for days, and she suspected it had been some time since he had enjoyed a home-cooked meal. "Well," Jack said finally, "I suppose Rosie could use some water and rest, but just for a short while." As they walked toward the house, Sarah found herself stealing glances at their unexpected guest. Jack moved with the careful efficiency of a man accustomed to relying on himself, but she noticed how his eyes constantly surveyed their surroundings. alert for potential threats. It was the behavior of someone who had learned not to trust in safety or permanence. Inside the modest home, Jack removed his hat and looked around with obvious appreciation. The interior was simple but warm, with handmade furniture and small touches that spoke of a woman's care: quilted cushions, dried flowers in a ceramic vase, and children's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall. "You have a beautiful home," he said, and Sarah could tell he meant it. There was something wistful in his tone, as if he were remembering a life he had once known but lost. "Thomas and I built it together," Sarah replied, busying herself with preparations for lunch. He was very skilled with his hands. "Everything you see, he made himself." Jack nodded respectfully, understanding immediately that Thomas was no longer part of this picture. In the frontier, such losses were common, but that didn't make them any easier to bear. As Sarah prepared a simple meal of cornbread, beans, and fresh milk, Emma chatted excitedly about their daily routine, their animals, and her collection of interesting rocks found around the property. Jack listened with patient attention, occasionally asking gentle questions that encouraged her enthusiasm. "Do you have any children, Mr. Carson?" Emma asked with the directness only children possess. The question hit Jack like a physical blow. Sarah saw his hands tighten round his coffee cup, and a shadow passed over his features. "No," he said simply, his voice rougher than before. "No, I don't." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Sarah quickly changed the subject, asking about his travels and the conditions of the trails. Jack seemed grateful for the redirect, sharing practical information about weather patterns, recent Indian activity, and the locations of reliable water sources. Despite the awkward moment, Sarah found herself drawn to Jack's quiet intelligence and obvious experience. He spoke with the authority of someone who had seen much of the territory and understood its rhythms and dangers. More importantly, she sensed a fundamental decency in him that had been absent from many of the men who had passed through their area. "Leave a comment about what you think of this story so far." After lunch, Jack insisted on helping with some repairs around the property. Sarah protested that it wasn't necessary, but he was already examining a loose board on the porch and testing the stability of a fence post that had been giving her trouble. "These things can become real problems if they're not fixed properly," he said, pulling tools from his saddlebags. "Won't take long to set them right." As Jack worked, Sarah found excuses to remain nearby, ostensibly tending to various chores, but actually watching his skilled hands repair what she had struggled with for months. His movements were precise and economical, speaking of years of experience maintaining equipment and structures under challenging conditions. "You're very kind to do this," she said, bringing him a cup of water as he finished securing the fence post. "Just returning the favor for that fine meal," Jack replied, though they both knew his efforts far exceeded any debt for lunch. Had appointed herself as Jack's assistant, handing him tools and pestering him with questions about his life on the trail. To Sarah's surprise, Jack seemed to enjoy the child's company, his stern features softening whenever Emma's infectious laughter rang out across the yard. "Where do you sleep when you're traveling?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with curiosity about this exotic lifestyle. "Under the stars, mostly," Jack replied, checking the alignment of a board. "Sometimes I'll find a cave or an abandoned cabin if the weather's bad, but usually it's just me, Rosie, and the sky." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Emma pressed, with the fearless honesty of childhood. Jack paused in his work, his gaze distant. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but a man learns to make peace with solitude. Sometimes it's safer that way." Sarah heard something in his tone that spoke of deeper wounds than mere loneliness. She wondered what circumstances had driven him to choose such an isolated existence, but she respected his privacy too much to pry. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah realized she was dreading Jack's inevitable departure. It had been so long since she had adult company, and longer still, since she had felt the presence of a man who made her feel safe rather than wary. Jack's quiet competence and obvious respect for her independence was a combination she had never expected to encounter. When Jack finally announced that he should be moving on before dark, Emma's face fell with disappointment. "Can't you stay just one more day?" she pleaded. "I wanted to show you my favorite place by the creek." Jack knelt down to Emma's level, his expression gentle but firm. "I'm afraid I can't, little one. I've got business in the next county that can't wait. But thank you for making me feel so welcome." Emma threw her arms around Jack's neck in a spontaneous hug that clearly surprised him. For a moment, he stood frozen, as if he had forgotten how to respond to such open affection. Then, slowly, His arms came up to return the embrace. "Thank you for saving us," Emma whispered. When Jack stood and turned to Sarah, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race, a longing that matched her own, quickly hidden behind his usual reserved expression. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Mitchell," he said formally. "You've got a fine daughter and a good home here. I wish you both well." "Thank you, Mr. Carson, for everything," Sarah replied, wishing she could find words to express what his presence had meant to her. As Jack mounted Rosie and prepared to ride away, Sarah felt an unexpected surge of boldness. "Mr. Carson," she called out, "if your travels ever bring you this way again, you'll always be welcome here." Jack touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, but something in his expression suggested he considered this unlikely. "Take care of yourselves," he said simply, then urged Rosie into a steady trot that carried him away from the homestead and back toward the endless horizon. Sarah and Emma stood watching until horse and rider disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving behind only dust and the memory of a brief connection that had touched all their lives more deeply than any of them had expected. 3 weeks passed before Sarah saw Jack Carson again, but his memory lingered in the quiet moments of her daily routine. She found herself wondering about his solitary travels, imagining him making camp under starlit skies, and hoping that wherever his path led, he found some measure of peace. Emma spoke of him often, incorporating Jack and Rosie into her imaginative games, and asking repeatedly when they might visit again. Sarah's standard response that traveling men had their own business to attend to began to feel hollow, even to her own ears. The early October morning that brought Jack back to their homestead arrived with the crisp promise of winter. Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the familiar sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart leaped with recognition even before she saw the familiar silhouette of horse and rider cresting the hill. But something was wrong. Jack was slumped forward in the saddle, his usual erect posture replaced by the careful positioning of someone fighting significant pain. Rosie moved with unusual caution, as if aware of her rider's distress. "Emma," Sarah called urgently. "Come quickly." By the time Jack reached the yard, Sarah could see the dark stain of blood on his left shoulder and the pale, drawn expression that spoke of fever and exhaustion. He managed to dismount, but swayed dangerously once his boots touched the ground. "Mr. Carson," Emma cried out, running toward him with obvious delight that quickly turned to concern as she saw his condition. "I'm sorry to impose," Jack said through gritted teeth, his voice hoarse with pain. "Didn't have anywhere else to go. Got into some trouble with claim jumpers about 50 miles north. They got lucky with their aim." Sarah immediately stepped forward, her practical nature overriding any social awkwardness. "Don't apologize. Let's get you inside right now. Emma, run ahead and clear the kitchen table." Supporting Jack's uninjured side, Sarah helped him into the house. His skin was hot to the touch through his shirt, and she could see that infection had begun to set in around the bullet wound. Without proper medical attention, such injuries could easily prove fatal in the isolated frontier. "When did this happen?" she asked, helping him ease down onto a chair beside the kitchen table. 4 days ago," Jack replied, his breathing labored. "Tried to clean it myself, but ... He gestured weakly at his shoulder, where crude bandaging had done little to stop the bleeding or prevent infection. Sarah had tended her share of injuries during her years on the frontier. Everything from Thomas's broken ribs to Emma's various childhood scrapes, but an infected gunshot wound was beyond her usual experience. Still, she knew that doing nothing meant watching Jack die, and that was unthinkable. "Emma, bring me all the clean cloth you can find," she instructed, already heating water on the stove, and fetched a bottle of whiskey from the pantry. As Sarah carefully cut away Jack's blood-stained shirt, she tried to keep her expression neutral despite the severity of what she saw. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone but tearing through muscle and creating a wound that had become badly infected during his days of hard travel. "This is going to hurt," she warned, cleaning the wound as gently as possible while Jack gripped the edge of the table with his good hand. I've had worse," Jack managed, though his face had gone white with pain. Working with careful precision, Sarah cleaned the wound thoroughly, applied a poultice made from herbs she had learned to use for healing, and wrapped Jack's shoulder in clean bandages. Throughout the process, he remained stoically silent, though she could see the tremendous effort it cost him. "You need rest and time for your body to fight this infection," she said when she had finished. "The spare room is small, but the bed is comfortable. You're not leaving here until you're properly healed. Jack started to protest, his ingrained independence rebelling against accepting such extensive help. But his body betrayed him with a wave of dizziness that left him gripping the table for support. I don't want to be a burden, he said weakly. You're not, Sarah replied firmly. You saved our lives. The least we can do is help save yours. If you're finding this story compelling, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to support me. Over the following days, Sarah found herself settling into the routine of caring for an invalid. She prepared special broths to help Jack regain his strength, changed his bandages twice daily, and monitored his fever with the careful attention of an experienced nurse. Emma proved to be an enthusiastic assistant, reading to Jack from her favorite books when he was awake and creating elaborate drawings to decorate his room when he slept. Her presence seemed to provide a distraction from his pain that surprised all of them. She's a remarkable child, Jack said one afternoon as they listened to Emma's cheerful singing from the kitchen where she was helping prepare dinner. You've raised her well. I can't take all the credit, Sarah replied, adjusting his pillow to help him sit more comfortably. Thomas was a wonderful father during the time he had with her, and Emma has always had a gift for finding joy in simple things. Tell me about him, Jack said quietly. Your husband? What was he like? Sarah hesitated, surprised by the request, but recognizing genuine interest in Jack's tone. It had been so long since anyone had asked about Thomas, and she found herself wanting to share those memories. He was gentle, she said finally. Quiet, like you, but in a different way. Where you're quiet because you're watching and thinking. Thomas was quiet because he was content. He found peace in small things, building furniture, working in the garden, sitting on the porch in the evenings, listening to Emma's chatter. Jack listened intently, and Sarah sensed that her description resonated with something in his own experience or longing. He sounds like a good man, Jack said. He was, but he wasn't. He wasn't particularly strong, physically. The frontier was hard on him. When the consumption came, he just couldn't fight it. Sarah's voice grew soft with old grief. I sometimes wonder if we should have stayed back east, where there were doctors and hospitals. But then Emma wouldn't have grown up with all this freedom and beauty, Jack observed, gesturing toward the window where the vast Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly, and you wouldn't have become the strong, capable woman you are now. The compliment, unexpected and clearly sincere, brought warmth to Sarah's cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had seen her as anything other than a struggling widow that Jack's recognition of her strength felt like a precious gift. As Jack's fever broke and his strength gradually returned, the atmosphere in the small house began to change. What had started as a medical necessity evolved into something warmer and more personal. Jack helped with small tasks around the house, his presence bringing a sense of security that Sarah had forgotten was possible. Emma blossomed under the attention of an adult who took her questions seriously and never seemed to tire of her endless curiosity. Jack taught her to whittle small animals from pieces of wood, showed her how to read weather patterns in the sky, and shared carefully edited stories of his travels that sparked her imagination without frightening her. Why don't you have a family of your own? Emma asked one evening as the three of them sat around the kitchen table after dinner. The question hung in the air like smoke, and Sarah saw Jack's expression close off slightly. But instead of deflecting, as he had before, he seemed to consider his answer carefully. I did once, he said finally. A long time ago. But sometimes life takes things away from us, and we have to learn to live with what remains. Like how Mama lost Papa, Emma asked with the direct logic of childhood. Something like that, Jack agreed, his voice rough with old pain. Sarah felt her heart ache for whatever loss had driven Jack to his solitary existence. She wanted to ask more, to understand the source of the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes, but she respected his privacy too much to press. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Jack sat on the porch together, listening to the sounds of the prairie settling into darkness. The comfortable silence between them spoke of a growing ease with each other's company that neither had expected. I should be moving on soon, Jack said eventually, though he sounded reluctant rather than eager. Should you? Sarah asked, her heart racing at her own boldness. Or do you just think you should? Jack turned to look at her, and in the moonlight she could see surprise, and something else, hope, perhaps, or longing in his expression. Mrs. Mitchell. Sarah, he said carefully. I'm not sure I'm the kind of man who's meant for the settled life. I've been running for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place. Maybe, Sarah said softly. It's time to learn. The conversation on the porch marked a turning point that neither Sarah nor Jack could ignore. Over the following weeks, as autumn painted the Wyoming hills in shades of gold and crimson. The pretense that Jack's stay was temporary gradually faded into honest acknowledgement of what was growing between them. Jack's recovery progressed steadily, but instead of preparing to leave, he began taking on larger responsibilities around the homestead. He repaired the barn door that had been damaged by the bear, reinforced the chicken coop against future predators, and helped Sarah prepare for the harsh winter that was approaching. More importantly, he began to share pieces of his past that helped Sarah understand the man beneath the guarded exterior. "I had a wife once," he told her one evening as they worked together preserving vegetables from the garden. "Her name was Catherine. We had a little farm in Kansas, and she was everything good about the world." Sarah listened without interruption, sensing the difficulty this revelation cost him. "She died in childbirth," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The baby too, a little girl. After that, I couldn't stay in that place surrounded by all the dreams we'd built together. So I sold everything and started riding west. That was 8 years ago." Sarah's heart ached for the young man. He must have been full of hope and love, destroyed by a loss so profound that he had spent nearly a decade running from it. "I'm so sorry," she said simply, knowing that no words could adequately address such grief. "I thought I was done with hoping for that kind of life," Jack admitted. "Then I came here, and you and Emma, you reminded me what it felt like to be part of something bigger than just surviving." The honesty of his confession moved Sarah deeply. She understood now why he had been so hesitant to get close to them, and why Emma's innocent affection had affected him so strongly. "Catherine wouldn't want you to spend your whole life alone," Sarah said gently. "From what you've told me about her, she loved you too much to want that for you." Jack nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know. It just took me a long time to believe I deserved another chance at happiness." Their relationship deepened with this new understanding. Sarah found herself looking forward to their quiet conversations in the evenings, when Emma was asleep and they could speak freely about their fears, hopes, and the gradual realization that they were building something precious together. Jack, for his part, began to display a contentment that transformed his entire demeanor. The constant alertness that had characterized his movements began to relax into the easy confidence of a man who had found his place. Emma's laughter became a daily soundtrack that seemed to heal something fundamental in his wounded soul. The first real test of their growing bond came in late November, when a group of rough-looking men rode up to the homestead. Sarah recognized the type: immediately drifters and troublemakers who preyed on isolated settlements, counting on fear and intimidation to get what they wanted. "We heard there might be work around here," their leader announced, though his eyes were already cataloging the property's assets with obvious interest. Food and shelter in exchange for labor. Sarah felt the familiar spike of fear that such encounters always brought. But this time Jack stepped calmly out of the barn, his rifle held casually but prominently. "Afraid there's no work here," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who would not be intimidated. "You'd best move along." The confrontation that followed was brief but tense. The strangers clearly had not expected to find an armed man defending the property, and Jack's reputation as someone not to be trifled with preceded him among certain circles of frontier society. "We don't want any trouble," the leader said finally, his bluster evaporating under Jack's steady gaze. "Then you won't find any here," Jack replied, "as long as you keep riding." After the men departed, Sarah felt a profound gratitude that went beyond mere physical protection. Jack had not just defended their property, he had claimed it as his own, marking himself as permanently invested in their welfare. "Thank you," she said simply, though the words carried the weight of everything she felt. "No thanks needed," Jack replied. "This is my home now too, and no one threatens my family." The word family hung between them, acknowledging what they had all gradually accepted but never explicitly stated. They were no longer three separate individuals sharing temporary proximity. They had become a unit, bound together by choice, affection, and mutual commitment. As winter settled over the territory, Sarah marveled at how naturally Jack had integrated into their daily routine. He helped Emma with her lessons, teaching her practical skills that complemented the reading and arithmetic Sarah provided. He maintained the animals and equipment with the care of someone invested in long-term success, rather than mere temporary assistance. Most importantly, he brought to their isolated home the presence of someone who understood both the challenges and the beauty of frontier life. His stories of distant places expanded Emma's understanding of the world, while his quiet strength provided Sarah with the partnership she had never known she needed. The formal proposal came on a snowy December evening, as they sat before the fireplace while Emma played with wooden animals Jack had carved for her. It was not dramatic or elaborate, just Jack's quiet voice, asking if Sarah would be willing to make their arrangement permanent and legal. "I know I'm not the same kind of man Thomas was," he said. "I'm older, and I carry more scars than any woman should have to deal with. But I love you, Sarah, and I love Emma like she was my own daughter. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of the home you've given me." Sarah's answer came not in words but in the kiss she had been wanting to give him 4 weeks, soft and sure, and full of promise for their shared future. The wedding took place in Cedar Ridge on a cold but brilliant January morning, with Emma serving as witness and the local preacher performing a simple ceremony that legally bound together 3 hearts that had already found their way to each other as they returned to the homestead as a newly formed family. Sarah reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them together. A moment of terror and danger had become the foundation for love, healing, and new hope. Jack had found his way home to a life he thought he had lost forever, while Sarah and Emma had gained not just protection but partnership and joy. "Are you happy, Mama?" Emma asked as they approached the familiar site of their house, smoke rising welcomingly from the chimney that Jack had repaired during his recovery. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her arm around her daughter while Jack's strong hand covered hers. "We're all exactly where we're supposed to be." The Wyoming wind carried the scent of snow and the promise of spring still months away. But inside their small home, warmth and laughter and the quiet contentment of love finally found would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. Behind them, the vast landscape stretched endlessly toward distant horizons, no longer empty and threatening but full of possibilities for the family that had chosen to make their stand together in the heart of the American West. What an incredible journey we've witnessed, from a terrifying encounter with a wild bear to the beautiful formation of a new family. Sarah, Emma, and Jack each found exactly what they needed in each other: protection, love, healing, and the courage to build a future together. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which part touched you the most? Was it the initial rescue, the growing romance, or perhaps the way Emma helped heal Jack's wounded heart? Leave a comment below and let's discuss this heartwarming tale. What was your favorite moment in this Old West story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll make sure to respond to as many as I can. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. There are many more tales of courage, love, and adventure coming your way.